March 15, 1962. Romano's restaurant, Little Italy. 8 guns were waiting. 1 chair was empty. Bumpy Johnson walked in alone, and a gangster laughed. 90 seconds later, the balance of New York shifted without a shot fired. This wasn't revenge or pride. It was a calculation. So how did one man survive a perfect trap and end a war before it began? To understand that moment, we have to go back to the first move. March 15, 1962, 2:30 in the afternoon. Romano's restaurant sat on Mulberry Street with its windows blacked out and its door locked, the kind of closed door that meant someone was about to die inside. The curtains were drawn so tight that even spring sunlight could not get through, turning the interior into a cave lit by dull yellow bulbs. Inside, the air tasted like burnt espresso and fear. 8 men sat positioned around the room, each one holding a weapon that could put holes in a human being. Tommy Marchetti sat nearest the door with a sawed-off shotgun across his lap, the kind that turned a man's chest into hamburger at close range. Paulie Greco was by the kitchen with a .45 that had already killed 3 people that year. The other 6 were scattered at tables with revolvers, automatics, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. Vincent Torino sat at the back corner table with his spine against the wall and his right hand 6 inches from a Colt .45 on the white tablecloth. He was smiling the way a wolf smiles when it sees a rabbit with no holes to hide in. He had been planning this moment for 6 months, ever since Bumpy Johnson started moving into the docks and taking contracts that belonged to Italian crews. 5 minutes, Torino said to Paulie. 5 minutes and we teach Harlem what happens when you forget your place. Paulie checked his .45, pulling the slide back just enough to see brass in the chamber. Do you want it quick or slow? Torino drained his cold espresso. I want him to sit down. I want him to understand what is about to happen. Then, when I see it in his eyes that he knows he is finished, 1 shot to the head. Professional. What about the body? Trunk of a car, pier, concrete. By tomorrow morning, Bumpy Johnson is fish food. Torino lit a cigarette. The other families have been watching this for 3 years. After today, everyone will know you do not take what belongs to us. Outside, a black Cadillac pulled up and sat there with the engine running. Nobody got out for 30 seconds. 40. Long enough that the men inside started getting nervous, hands tightening on guns, safeties clicking off. Then the passenger door opened and Bumpy Johnson stepped out alone. No bodyguards, no backup cars. Just 1 man in a pressed gray suit carrying an old leather briefcase. Torino's smile got wider. The arrogant son of a bitch actually came alone. Tommy Marchetti leaned forward. Maybe he does not know this is a hit. He knows, Torino said. He just thinks he is smart enough to walk out alive. In 3 minutes, he is going to learn he was wrong. Bumpy reached the door and knocked twice. Tommy stood up, holding the shotgun low. He unlocked the bolt and pulled the door open. Bumpy stepped inside and the door closed behind him with a heavy click that sounded like a trap snapping shut. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. Bumpy stood just inside the door, taking in the room. He saw the 8 men, saw the guns, saw the overlapping fields of fire. His face showed nothing, no fear, no surprise. Just calm. He started walking toward Torino's table, his shoes clicking on tiles. The briefcase swung slightly. His jacket hung open enough that everyone could see he was not carrying a weapon. No shoulder holster, no gun in his waistband. No knife. Tommy's finger tightened on the shotgun trigger. Paulie's hand moved inside his jacket toward the .45. Every man in the room was coiled tight, waiting for Torino to give the signal. But Torino held up 1 hand. Not yet. Bumpy stopped 6 feet from Torino's table and set the briefcase down. You wanted to talk, Vincent, so let us talk. Torino gestured to the chair. Sit down. Let us have a civilized conversation before we handle the uncivilized part. You have been pushing into the docks for 3 years, taking contracts from Italian crews. You made us look weak. That cannot stand." Bumpy sat down, his hands folding on the table. Around him, 8 guns were aimed at various parts of his body. One man. 8 guns. 0 chance of survival unless something changed. But something was wrong. Torino could feel it. Bumpy was too calm. Too relaxed. His eyes kept flicking to the briefcase like he was waiting for something, like there was a clock ticking somewhere that only he could hear. Torino leaned forward. "You know what happened to Eddie Romano, the last man who tried to muscle in on Italian docks? We put him in the Hudson River in pieces, started with his fingers, used bolt cutters, took them off one at a time while he screamed. When the fingers were gone, we moved to the hands. Then the feet. Then the legs. By the time we were finished, Eddie was a torso with a head, and we stuffed what was left into a drum with concrete and dropped it off the pier at midnight. That was 10 years ago. His family still does not know what happened." Bumpy's expression did not change. "You finished?" Torino's jaw tightened. "I am trying to help you understand the situation." "I understand," Bumpy said, his voice quiet but carrying through the room. 8 guns. 1 exit. You think this is a trap. You think the next 90 seconds end with me on the floor. You have been planning this for 6 months. You sent the invitation. You positioned your men. You locked the door." He paused. He looked at his watch. "You are wrong about all of it. And in about 90 seconds, you are going to understand that the trap you set was not for me. It was for you." Torino's smile died. His hand moved closer to the .45. "What the hell are you talking about?" Bumpy reached for the briefcase. Every gun in the room came up. 8 hammers cocked. 8 fingers tightened on triggers. Tommy's shotgun was aimed at Bumpy's spine. Paulie's .45 was pointed at his skull. But what Bumpy pulled out was not a gun. It was a folder. Thick, stuffed with papers and photographs that spilled across the table. "You wanted to know why I walked into your trap? Because I needed you all in one room. Needed all 8 of you here at the same time with the door locked. Because in about 60 seconds, the FBI is going to kick that door down with a warrant for your arrest. Illegal weapons trafficking through the docks, racketeering, conspiracy, all backed by 3 years of evidence I have been collecting." Torino's face went white. "You are lying. The photographs show your men unloading crates of M1 rifles stolen from Fort Dix. The documents show how you bribed customs inspectors. The recordings have your voice discussing prices. Federal crimes, Vincent. The kind that put you away for 20 years minimum." Bumpy looked at his watch. 30 seconds. Outside, the sound of car doors slamming, multiple vehicles, heavy footsteps. Torino stood up so fast his chair fell over. His hand grabbed the .45 but froze halfway because the math had just changed. "Shoot, Bumpy, and the FB. I hears gunshots and storms in with murder added to the weapons charges." The front door exploded inward, kicked. The frame splintered and 6 FBI agents in dark suits came through with revolvers drawn. "Federal agents, nobody move. Hands where we can see them." Torino's .45 clattered to the floor. Tommy's shotgun followed. All 8 men froze. Agent Robert Davis walked in behind the others, his eyes landing on Bumpy still sitting calmly at the table. "Mr. Johnson, are you all right?" "Fine, Agent Davis, just having a conversation about the docks." Davis turned to Torino. "Vincent Torino, you are under arrest for trafficking in stolen military weapons." He continued reading while 2 agents put handcuffs on Torino, who stood there with his mouth hanging open, his brain trying to process how the trap he set had become his own cage. Bumpy stood up, closed the briefcase, and walked toward the door. He paused next to Torino. "You wanted to teach Harlem about respect, about territory, about knowing our place. Here is what you should have learned instead. Real power does not come from guns or threats. It comes from knowing things other people do not know and being patient enough to wait until that knowledge becomes a weapon. You spent 6 months planning this meeting. I spent 3 years planning your arrest. He walked out into the spring sunlight, while behind him, the FBI processed a crime scene that would put 8 men away for a combined 160 years and end Italian control of the Manhattan docks forever. 3 years before Romano's restaurant became a crime scene, the war started with a handshake that neither man meant. June 1959, a Union Hall on the West Side docks where longshoremen came to collect their pay and place their bets on horses that would lose at Belmont. Bumpy Johnson walked in wearing a suit that cost more than most of these men made in a month, carrying a briefcase that did not contain a gun but something more dangerous. A contract. A legitimate contract to provide shipping insurance to independent freight companies that worked the piers. Vincent Torino was already there, sitting at a table in the back with 3 of his enforcers, men whose knuckles were scarred from breaking faces and whose jackets bulged with weapons they were not shy about using. Torino had controlled the docks since 1954, ever since the previous controller, a man named Angelo Benedetti, had fallen off a pier with his hands tied behind his back and enough chain wrapped around his ankles to keep him on the bottom forever. The police called it an accident. Everyone else called it a message. When Bumpy walked past Torino's table without stopping, without nodding, without showing any sign that he recognized the man who owned this building and everyone in it, Torino's jaw clenched hard enough to crack a molar. "You lost, friend? Harlem is 20 blocks north." Bumpy stopped, turned. Look at Torino the way you look at a chair you are deciding whether to sit in or throw through a window. "I am not lost. I am here to do business with men who want to pay less for insurance and get better coverage. You have a problem with that. We can discuss it outside. You do not have a problem with that. I will finish my meeting and leave." One of Torino's enforcers, a thick man named Carmine who had once beaten a debtor so badly the man lost the ability to form complete sentences, started to stand up. Torino put a hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down. "No problem. Free country. Man can do business where he wants." But there was a problem. A big problem. Torino had been skimming insurance money from dock workers for 5 years, forcing them to buy overpriced policies from companies he controlled, pocketing 40% of every premium. Now here was Bumpy Johnson offering better rates through legitimate companies, cutting into profits that Torino considered his by right of blood and tradition. This was not a competition. This was an invasion. This was Harlem walking into Italian territory and acting like the old rules did not matter anymore. That night, Torino held a meeting in the back room of a restaurant on Mulberry Street. 7 men. No food, just wine and cigarettes and a conversation about how to handle the Harlem problem before it became a Harlem disaster. "We send a message," Carmine said, cracking his knuckles in a way that suggested the message would be delivered with fists and tire irons. "We find one of his people on the docks. We break both his legs. We tell him to tell Bumpy that insurance is not his business and he should go back to running numbers in Harlem where he belongs." Torino shook his head. "Breaking legs starts wars. Wars are expensive. Wars draw attention from cops and feds and people we pay to look the other way, but who stop looking the other way when bodies start piling up. We handle this smartly. We go to the dock supervisors. We remind them who controls their paychecks. We make sure Bumpy's insurance clients suddenly have problems. Cargo gets lost. Shipments get delayed. Accidents happen. Nothing that points back to us, but enough that these independent companies realize doing business with Bumpy Johnson costs more than it saves. It was a good plan. It should have worked. It would have worked on anyone who was playing by the old rules. The rules that said Italians owned the docks and everyone else could either pay tribute or get buried under them. But Bumpy was not playing by the old rules. He was writing new ones. Within 2 weeks, the dock supervisors who were supposed to make Bumpy's clients miserable were suddenly refusing Torino's orders. Not openly, not in a way that could be traced back to insubordination. They just stopped being as helpful as they used to be. Shipments that were supposed to get delayed went through on time. Cargo that was supposed to get lost arrived intact. When Torino asked why, the supervisors shrugged and said labor was watching them more closely these days, said there were rumors of federal investigations into dock corruption, and said maybe it was better to keep things clean for a while. Torino did not believe in coincidences. He knew Bumpy had gotten to them somehow, had either paid them more, or threatened them worse, or found some leverage that made them more afraid of crossing Bumpy than of crossing Torino. So Torino escalated. He sent Carmine and 2 others to have a conversation with a freight company owner who had switched his insurance to one of Bumpy's providers. The conversation happened in the man's office after hours. It involved Carmine holding the man's hand flat on his desk and using a letter opener to put a hole through his palm that went all the way through to the wood underneath. "Next time we have this conversation," Carmine said while the man screamed and his hand bled all over the quarterly reports, "it will not be your hand. It will be your wife's hand. You understand?" The man understood. Canceled his insurance with Bumpy's provider the next day. Went back to paying Torino's inflated rates. Torino thought he had won that round. He was wrong. What he had actually done was give Bumpy exactly the evidence he needed to start building a federal case, because the freight company owner was terrified enough of another visit from Carmine that he went to the police with photographs of his wounded hand and a sworn statement about who put the hole there and why. The police did nothing. Half of them were on Torino's payroll. But Bumpy did something. He took that police report and the photographs and the sworn statement to FBI agent Robert Davis, a man who had been trying to build a case against dock corruption for 3 years, but could never get anyone to testify because everyone was too afraid of ending up at the bottom of the Hudson River with their legs wired to engine blocks. Now here was Bumpy Johnson handing him a witness and evidence and a clear line from violence to extortion to racketeering. Davis asked Bumpy what he wanted in return. Bumpy said he wanted the docks to operate legally, wanted workers to have choices about their insurance, and wanted organized crime to stop bleeding the waterfront dry. Davis knew this was only half true. What Bumpy really wanted was for Torino gone so he could move into the territory without a war. But Davis did not care about Bumpy's motives. He cared about making a case that would stick, so they made a deal. For 3 years, the war continued. Torino would threaten. Bumpy would document. Torino would bribe a supervisor. Bumpy would bribe him back with double the money. Torino would have his men rough up a dock worker who was being too friendly with Bumpy's people. Bumpy would make sure that dock worker got medical bills paid and a lawyer who knew how to file charges that the police could not ignore. It was chess played with human pieces. No guns, no bombs, no bodies. Just pressure and counter-pressure, move and counter-move, each side trying to strangle the other without making enough noise to bring down law enforcement that even corruption could not deflect. By 1962, Torino was exhausted. His profits were down 40%. His men were getting arrested for minor infractions that used to get ignored. His political protection was evaporating because the politicians he owned were suddenly facing primary challenges from reformers who were getting funded by money Torino could not trace but suspected came from Harlem. He was losing a war he did not understand how to fight because it was not being fought with the tools he knew how to use. So he decided to go back to the old playbook, the one written in broken bones and shallow graves, the one that said, "When you cannot win through intimidation, you win through elimination." That was when he sent the invitation to Bumpy Johnson. That was when he set the trap at Romano's restaurant. That was when he made the mistake that would cost him everything. Small's paradise was packed with bodies moving to Duke Ellington on the jukebox when the man in the Italian suit walked through the door. He was not there to drink. He was there to deliver a message. And everyone knew messages delivered by Italians in Harlem after midnight usually required funerals. The man walked straight to the bar where Junie Bird was counting receipts and set down a cream-colored envelope with Bumpy Johnson's name written in fountain pen. "For your boss," the man said, his voice flat. "He has 48 hours to respond. If he does not respond, people in Harlem start dying. Not him. Not at first. The people around him. They die first. Then we come for him." Junie's hand moved under the bar toward the .45. The Italian saw it and smiled. "You pull that gun. I have 3 men outside who will turn this place into a morgue. You do not pull it. I walk out and you give that envelope to Bumpy. Your choice." Junie's hand stayed where it was. The Italian walked out. The music kept playing, but nobody was dancing. Everyone understood. The Italians had drawn a line. Bumpy could cross it and start a war, or stay behind it and look weak. Either way, Harlem was about to bleed. Junie called Bumpy at midnight. Bumpy arrived 20 minutes later and took the envelope without opening it. Who brought it? Italian, young, early 20s, confident. Bumpy opened it. Inside was an address in Little Italy and a time. 2:30 in the afternoon, March 15th. Below that, one sentence. "Come alone or Harlem learns what happens when protection is not enough." Bumpy read it twice, folded it, put it in his jacket. His face showed nothing. "Get Illinois, get Willie, get Clayton, my apartment in 1 hour." 1 hour later, 4 men sat around a table in Bumpy's apartment. No music. No drinks. The envelope sat in the center like evidence. Illinois Gordon spoke first. "This is a trap. They want you in a room where they control the exits. They want you dead. We do not let you walk into this. We hit them first. Tonight." Willie Gaines nodded. "We know where Torino lives. We put a bomb under his car. Problem solved." Clayton Moore shook his head. "You kill Torino. The Genovese family gets involved. You start a war with people who have more soldiers than we do. Maybe we will win. Maybe. But we win at a cost that leaves Harlem burning." Bumpy stared at the envelope. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried weight. "No bombs, no war, no hitting them first." Illinois leaned forward. "They invited you to your own funeral. You walk in there alone, you die alone." "The math is wrong," Bumpy said. "You are counting guns. I am counting the years. For 3 years I have been building a federal case against Torino. Weapons trafficking, stolen military rifles moving through the docks. Every shipment is documented. Every bribe was recorded. I gave it all to the FBI. Agent Robert Davis has a warrant ready. He is waiting for the right moment. The moment when all of Torino's people are in one place." Willie's eyes narrowed. "What moment?" 2:30 in the afternoon on March 15th. At Romano's restaurant. When I walk in and Torino thinks he is about to kill me. When all his men are there with weapons drawn. When the FBI kicks down the door and finds armed felons committing conspiracy to murder on top of federal weapons charges. Illinois understood. "You are using yourself as bait." "Yes." "What if the timing is wrong? What if Torino shoots you before the FBI gets through the door?" Bumpy pulled a small tape recorder from his pocket. "I will be wearing a wire. Agent Davis will be listening. The second Torino threatens me, the FBI comes through the door. I plan on sitting there calm while Torino explains why I am about to die. And while he is explaining, I am going to show him the photographs and documents that prove he has been trafficking stolen weapons for 5 years. I am going to watch his face when he realizes the trap was not for me. It was for him." Clayton exhaled slowly. "You have been planning this for 3 years. Since the first time Torino sent his men to intimidate my clients. For the first time he put a letter opener through a man's hand. I let him think he was winning. Let him get frustrated. Let him get desperate. Desperate men make mistakes, and Torino just made the biggest mistake of his life. Illinois leaned back. What do you need from us? I need you far away from Romano's when it goes down, visible in Harlem doing normal business. Ready to move fast after Torino is arrested, because there will be a window when his organization is in chaos and we can move into the docks without resistance. If this goes wrong, if I do not walk out, you do not start a war. You give the evidence to Agent Davis and let the FBI finish what I started. Promise me. Finally, Illinois nodded. We promise. But you better walk out, Bumpy. Harlem needs you. Bumpy stood, walked to the window, looked out at Harlem sleeping under orange streetlights. Torino thinks he set a trap for me, thinks he is going to teach Harlem a lesson. What he does not understand is that I have been setting a trap for him since the day he decided violence was the answer. He is going to walk into Romano's thinking he is the hunter. He is going to leave in handcuffs understanding he was always the prey. For 48 hours, Harlem held its breath. Word spread about the envelope, about the deadline, about Bumpy being called to Little Italy alone. Barbershops went quiet. Corner stores closed early. People stayed home and locked their doors because when wars start between Harlem and Little Italy, bullets do not care who they hit. March 15th arrived. Bumpy woke at 6, ate breakfast, dressed in his gray suit, checked the tape recorder, called Agent Davis to confirm. Davis said his team would be in position at 2:15, said if anything went wrong, if Bumpy said the word red, they would breach immediately. Haha, Bumpy hung up, looked at himself in the mirror, picked up his briefcase, walked out, got in the Cadillac, and drove toward Little Italy, knowing that in 3 hours either Vincent Torino would be in federal custody or Bumpy Johnson would be in a morgue. Just the cold mathematics of a trap inside a trap. And the only question was which trap would spring first. 3 years before the envelope arrived at Small's Paradise, Bumpy Johnson made a decision that would determine whether he lived or died on March 15, 1962. Instead of fighting Vincent Torino with guns and bombs, Bumpy would fight him with something more permanent. Evidence, documentation, the kind of proof that survived in filing cabinets and courtrooms long after bodies turned to dust. It started with a kid, Michael Riachi, 19 years old, Italian by blood, working the loading docks because his uncle was connected and his father owed favors. Michael was not made, was not even close. He was just muscle with a strong back and a weak brain, the kind of kid who moved crates without asking what was in them. He was invisible, which made him perfect. Bumpy found Michael on a Tuesday afternoon in August 1959, standing outside a warehouse smoking a cigarette. Bumpy walked up like they were old friends. "You Michael Ricci?" The kid dropped his cigarette and his hand moved toward his waistband. "Who wants to know?" "Someone who knows you owes $12,000 to a bookmaker in the Bronx. Someone who knows your uncle is not going to cover that debt. Someone who knows that when you cannot pay, they are going to take it out of your legs with a baseball bat, starting with the kneecaps." Bumpy let that sit. "I can make that debt disappear. All I need in return is information." Michael's face went the color of spoiled milk. "What kind of information?" "The kind that comes in crates marked agricultural equipment but actually contains M1 rifles stolen from Fort Dix. The kind that gets loaded onto trucks at midnight when customs inspectors have been paid to look away. The kind that your boss Vincent Torino has been moving through these docks for 5 years. You are asking me to rat on Torino? You know what they do to rats? They kill your family, your mother, your sister, everyone." Bumpy pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it across. Inside was $12,000 in cash. "This pays your debt today. You take the money, pay the bookmaker, and start keeping a journal. Dates, times, what comes in, what goes out, who signs off, who gets paid. You do that for 3 years, and I make sure you are protected when this comes down. You do not do that, I put the word out that you already talked, and Torino comes for you anyway." Michael took the envelope. His hands were shaking. How do I know you will protect me? You do not, Bumpy said. But I have been in this business for 30 years. I am still alive because I keep my word. Torino has been here for 15 years. Half the people who worked for him are dead or in prison. You decide who is more likely to keep you breathing. Michael decided. For 3 years he kept a journal, wrote down everything in a spiral notebook he hid in his apartment. Dates and times of shipments, license plate numbers, names of customs inspectors who signed off without opening crates, names of cops who provided escorts. Every 2 weeks, Bumpy's people collected the notebook, photographed every page, and returned it within 24 hours. By 1961, Bumpy had a file 3 inches thick. Photographs of crates being unloaded, recordings of phone calls between Torino and buyers discussing prices, copies of customs documents that had been altered, bank records showing deposits that corresponded to weapon sales. Everything is documented, everything is dated, the kind of evidence that federal prosecutors dream about. The problem was finding someone in law enforcement who was not already on Torino's payroll. Local police were useless. Half of them took money from Torino directly. That left the federal, FBI, the only agency Torino had not corrupted. Bumpy arranged a meeting with FBI agent Robert Davis in November 1961. In a parking garage in Queens at 2 in the morning. Davis was young, maybe 35, clean-cut, suspicious. He got out with his hand near his weapon. You said you had information about weapons trafficking. Bumpy handed him a manila folder. Vincent Torino has been moving stolen military weapons through the Manhattan docks for 5 years. Everything in that folder, photographs, recordings, documents. 3 years of evidence collected by someone on the inside. Davis opened the folder, started reading. After 5 minutes, he looked up with eyes that had gone from suspicious to predatory. Where did you get this? That does not matter. What matters is whether it is enough to get a warrant. It is enough to get 20 warrants, Davis said. Enough to put Torino and everyone who works for him in federal prison for the rest of their lives. But I need to know the source. Bumpy smiled without warmth. Everything in that folder is real and can be verified. You run the serial numbers on those weapons. They will match rifles stolen from Fort Dix in 1958. You check the bank deposits. They will correspond to weapon sales down to the dollar. The only question is whether you want to use it. Davis closed the folder. What do you want in return? I want you to wait until Torino makes a mistake. Until he does something stupid that puts him and all his men in one place at one time with weapons visible and intent clear. I want you to arrest him in a way that makes it impossible for him to claim he was not involved. Can you do that? I can do that, Davis said, but it might take time. I have been working on this for 3 years, Bumpy said. I can wait. But when the moment comes, when I tell you it is time, you need to be ready to move fast. You need to have the warrant signed, your team in position, ready to kick down a door and arrest everyone inside. Can you do that? Davis nodded. Give me a date and a location. I will be there. That was November 1961. 4 months later, the envelope arrived at Small's Paradise. Bumpy called Davis that night, told him March 15th, 2:30 in the afternoon, Romano's on Mulberry Street. Told him Torino and at least 8 armed men would be there committing conspiracy to commit murder. Told him to bring a warrant and be ready to breach at 2:45. Davis asked if Bumpy understood the risk. Bumpy said he understood perfectly. Davis said he would have 6 agents positioned around the block, said they would be listening to the wire, said if anything went wrong, if Bumpy said the word red, they would come through the door immediately. The weapon nobody could see was not a gun. It was information. It was patience. It was the willingness to spend 3 years building a case instead of 3 seconds pulling a trigger. It was understanding that real power did not come from who had the most soldiers. It came from who had the best evidence and the ability to turn the law into a weapon that could not be bribed or intimidated. Torino thought he was inviting Bumpy to an execution. What he was actually doing was walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. Bumpy Johnson sat across from Vincent Torino in Romano's restaurant, with 8 guns pointed at various parts of his body, and death sitting at the table between them, like an uninvited guest who had shown up early and planned to stay late. Torino was smiling. Not the nervous smile of a man who suspects something is wrong. The genuine article. The smile of a wolf that has cornered a rabbit and is deciding which leg to bite off first. "You know what I like about you, Bumpy?" Torino said, lighting a cigarette with a match he struck on his thumbnail. "You have balls. Stupid balls, but balls. Walking in here alone. No backup. No weapons. Just you and that briefcase like you think we are going to discuss shipping contracts instead of how you are going to die." Bumpy's hands rested flat on the table. The wire taped to his chest under his shirt was picking up every word, transmitting it to Agent Davis and 5 other FBI agents positioned in vehicles around the block, waiting for probable cause to turn this restaurant into a federal crime scene. "Open the briefcase, Vincent." Torino's smile faltered. "What?" "The briefcase. Open it. You wanted to know why I walked into your trap. The answer is inside." Torino nodded to Paulie, who moved forward with his .45 drawn and ready to put a hole through Bumpy's skull if the briefcase contained anything that looked like a weapon. Paulie flipped the latches, opened the lid. Inside was not a gun, not a bomb, not anything designed to kill. Just a manila folder stuffed so thick with papers and photographs that it could barely close. Paulie pulled it out and handed it to Torino. Torino opened the folder, started reading. His face went from confident to confused to pale in the space of 10 seconds. The cigarette in his hand dropped to the floor and kept burning, a small orange circle eating through the tile. "Where did you get this?" "Michael Riachi kept very detailed records," Bumpy said. His voice was calm, conversational, like they were discussing the weather instead of evidence that would put Torino in federal prison until he was too old to remember his own name. 3 years of documentation, every shipment, every buyer, every customs inspector you bribed, every cop you paid to look the other way. Serial numbers on the weapons match rifles stolen from Fort Dix. Bank deposits correspond to sales down to the dollar. Phone records show you discussing prices and quantities with buyers in 6 different states. Federal crimes, Vincent. Not a city, not state. Federal. The kind that comes with mandatory minimums that even your lawyers cannot negotiate away. Torino's hands were shaking badly enough that the folder rattled. He looked up at his 8 men, all of them still holding guns, all of them waiting for the order to shoot. All of them starting to understand that the math in this room had just changed in a way that made shooting Bumpy the worst possible move they could make. "This is bullshit. This is fabricated. You paid someone to make this up." "Check the serial numbers yourself," Bumpy said. "Call Fort Dix. Ask them about the rifles that went missing in 1958. Ask them if the serial numbers in those photographs match their missing inventory, or do not check. Either way, the FBI already has. They already verified everything in that folder. They already have a warrant with your name on it. They are already positioned outside this restaurant waiting for you to do something stupid, like threaten to kill me in front of witnesses while surrounded by armed felons. All they need is probable cause. All they need is you to say one more threatening word into the wire I am wearing under my shirt." The color drained from Torino's face completely. He looked like a corpse that had not gotten the memo that it was supposed to lie down. His mouth opened, but nothing came out except a sound like air leaking from a tire that had been slashed. Outside, car doors slammed. Not 1. Not 2. 6 car doors closing in sequence like a countdown, like dominoes falling, like the sound of inevitability arriving right on schedule. Bumpy stood up slowly, his hands visible, his movements deliberate. "You wanted to teach Harlem a lesson about respect, about boundaries, about knowing our place. Here is the lesson you should have learned instead. Real power does not come from how many men you have or how many guns you carry. It comes from patience, from information, from being smart enough to know that the law can be a weapon if you know how to use it. You spent 6 months planning this trap. I spent 3 years planning yours. The front door of Romano's exploded inward, not unlocked, not opened politely. Kicked. The frame splintered and 6 FBI agents in dark suits came through with revolvers drawn and badges held high like shields against the kind of violence that was about to not happen, because everyone in that room understood simultaneously that shooting a federal agent was a death sentence that would be carried out by the state of New York in an electric chair at Sing Sing prison. "Federal agents, drop your weapons, hands where we can see them." 8 guns clattered to the floor in near unison. Tommy Marchetti's shotgun, Paulie Greco's .45, 6 revolvers and automatics hitting tile and skittering across the floor like they were suddenly too hot to hold. Hands went up, bodies froze, and in the center of it all, Vincent Torino stood with his mouth still hanging open, his brain trying to process how 90 seconds had turned him from hunter to prey, from predator to prisoner, from the man who controlled the Manhattan docks to a defendant who would spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary learning what it felt like to be powerless. Agent Robert Davis walked in behind his team, his eyes scanning the room, cataloging weapons and faces. He looked at Bumpy. "Mr. Johnson, you all right?" "Fine, Agent Davis, just concluding a business meeting." Davis turned to Torino and pulled out handcuffs. "Vincent Torino, you are under arrest for trafficking in stolen military weapons, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and about 15 other federal charges that my colleagues are going to read to you on the way to the federal building. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The handcuffs clicked closed around Torino's wrists. The sound echoed through the silent restaurant like a judge's gavel, coming down on a guilty verdict that everyone had seen coming except the defendant. Torino looked at Bumpy with eyes that had gone from confident to hollow, from predatory to defeated. "You set me up. This whole thing. 3 years. You set me up." "No," Bumpy said, picking up his briefcase and walking toward the door while federal agents processed the 8 men who 30 seconds ago had been planning to kill him. "You set yourself up the first time you decided violence was the answer to competition. I just documented it. The FBI arrested you. The law will convict you. I will take over the docks while you are learning how to make license plates in a prison workshop. That is not a setup. That is the consequence. Learn the difference." He walked out into the spring sunlight, while behind him, Romano's restaurant became a crime scene that would make front-page news for a week and send Vincent Torino and 8 of his associates to federal prison for a combined 200 years. 90 seconds. No shots fired. No bodies. No war. Just the cold application of evidence and law enforcement turned the trap Torino set for Bumpy into the cage that would hold Torino until he died of old age in a cell that smelled like disinfectant and regret. Torino got 20 years in federal prison. The judge handed down the sentence in a courtroom so quiet you could hear the court reporter's fingers hitting the keys. Torino stood there in an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed behind his back, listening to the rest of his life being measured out in decades instead of days. He served 18 years before lung cancer finished what the law started. Died in the prison infirmary in 1978 with no family present and no flowers sent except one arrangement from a funeral home that misspelled his name on the card. Romano's restaurant closed 3 weeks after the raid. The building sat empty for 2 years before someone bought it and turned it into a hardware store. By 1965, nobody remembered it had ever been anything else. The Italian families pulled out of Harlem completely. Not because Bumpy forced them out with violence. They left because Torino's arrest sent a message that could not be ignored. The docks were federal jurisdiction now. The FBI was watching. Any family that tried to move back in would walk into the same trap that swallowed Torino. Better to lose the territory than lose 20 years in a cage. When Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, Carlo Gambino sent a wreath to the funeral. No card, no message, just white roses arranged in a circle. Everyone understood what it meant. Respect, the kind you give to a man who beat you without throwing a punch. Bumpy took control of the Manhattan docks within 6 months of Torino's conviction. Not through intimidation, but through legitimate contracts and fair dealing with unions and shipping companies tired of paying protection money to criminals. He invested the profits back into Harlem. New businesses, better housing, programs for kids who needed something besides gangs. He did it quietly. No press conferences, no publicity. Just the steady accumulation of power through means that could not be prosecuted because they were legal and profitable. The lesson of March 15, 1962, got told and retold in barbershops and corner stores for the next 20 years. Got passed down from fathers to sons, from old-timers to young runners. And every time, the morale stayed the same. Real power does not come from how loud you shout or how many guns you carry. Real power comes from knowing things other people do not know and having the patience to wait until that knowledge becomes a weapon they cannot defend against. Torino spent 6 months planning Bumpy's execution. Bumpy spent 3 years planning Torino's imprisonment. One man thought violence was the answer. The other man understood that violence was just a question, and the real answer was written in filing cabinets and courtrooms and federal statutes that could not be bribed or intimidated. Bumpy Johnson never served another day in prison after Romano's. Died in his bed in 1968 of a heart attack, surrounded by people who respected him, not because they feared him, but because he had proven over 40 years that keeping your word and playing the long game was more profitable than any throne built on bodies and threats. The dock stayed in Harlem's hands for another decade. The investments he made kept paying dividends long after he was gone. And the story of how one man walked into a trap designed to kill him and walked out while his enemies got dragged away in handcuffs became the template for how smart operators handled conflicts when the FBI had resources that street crews could not match. Power, Bumpy understood, was not about domination. It was about information. It was about knowing what your enemy planned before they executed it. It was about building cases instead of body counts. It was about understanding that the law was the most dangerous weapon available if you were smart enough to load it properly and patient enough to wait until your target was standing in exactly the right spot. Vincent Torino learned that lesson 90 seconds too late. Bumpy Johnson had learned it 30 years earlier and spent the rest of his life proving it worked. This story is shared for historical insight and personal reflection, not to promote violence or illegal behavior. Thank you for watching until the end. These stories take weeks of research and writing to create. If this resonated with you, if you see the lesson Bumpy Johnson was teaching about accountability and education over violence, hit that subscribe button. Help us reach 1 million subscribers so we can keep telling stories that matter. Stories about power used wisely. Stories about consequences faced honestly. Stories about men who chose to change systems instead of just destroying enemies. The next video drops soon. Until then, remember, real power is not what you can destroy. It is what you choose to build.